I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Van, and no, that is not a typo up there. Do not attempt to clean your glasses. I rarely repeat myself, only when I say my name. But I am a program manager at Microsoft in the Internet Information Services Group, or IIS. We used to be Internet Information Server until somebody decided that we couldn't be called a server, and now we're a services group. And I'm basically here to talk about the next generation IIS. Very briefly, what I'll go over actually is Windows 2000. It's going to be one slide, trust me, it's very short. What's good about it, what we've done in that product. And then I'm going to go over the new generation IIS, the next generation. What we are currently calling IIS 6. The final name, we don't even know what it's going to be, but it's IIS, the next generation. I'm going to introduce you to a completely new architecture that is the new IIS, a brand new process model, and a brand new configuration system, which hopefully you guys will like. And then finally, once I've done all that, I'm going to talk about how to actually bridge the gap between IIS 5 and IIS 6, therefore bringing our customers with us into the new model and moving them forward as well, so nobody's left behind. One thing I want to let you all know, I don't know if this is the same in other sessions, but if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and I'll answer your question. There will be time at the end for questions as well, but I, for one, when I attend sessions, sometimes by the end of the session, I forget the question. So if there's a question on a specific slide, feel free to just ask it at that time, and I will address it immediately. There's plenty of time, trust me. Yesterday, I thought I was going to go over, and I was 10 minutes under. So there's no way you guys can make me go over. I guarantee you won't miss the next section. Windows 2000. So we NT4 with the NT option pack, and we knew that there were problems with the option pack, and in NT5 we did a lot of work in the areas of manageability with reliable restart, which is the ability to basically restart the web service if something crashes. We've added a lot of application isolation enhancements, CPU throttling, security, and in the internet standard way, because we want to make the world know that we are actually embracing internet standards, we actually put in WebDAV support, HTTP compression, digest authentication, and other things as well. In terms of the application environment, it was actually very simple for us. Better integration with COM+, making ASP enhancements, and of course, scriptable admin via ADSI. But one of the things we've noticed when we went back to our customers after delivering IIS 5 and Windows 2000, we went back and talked to them. And it was very interesting because we did a lot of work and we were very happy with it. And most of the customers were actually very happy with it. But they were telling us things, they were like, that honestly we were going, we thought about that, but we didn't think it was that important. Reliability we thought was very important, but 24/7 nowadays is really the norm. Everybody just wants that. Time and time again, even with Windows 2000, people are saying, I don't want to have to come in and reboot the server. Hit the reset button is not something. It is not an option. Hotmail, having 3,800 boxes, does not want to do that. vCentral has that exact same problem. Interland, HostPro, anybody that we've talked to have always given us that you've got to stay up all the time. So that's actually a very clear message. Manageability is an interesting little issue. We built the MMC. We have a very good MMC. And we thought that it's a great UI. And whenever we talk to people, they go, yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. We love it. There's only one little problem. Guess what? I have 1,000 boxes. I really don't want to be clicking on 1,000 boxes. That's the reason why I really, really, really want you to have complete scriptability. Everything has to be able to be done via the command line. That's a fair enough requirement. Scalability, probably a very normal requirement. IIS 5 and Windows 2000 scales a lot better than NT4 in the option pack. But there's definitely a lot of things that we can do in this area. And so we're looking at that. We looked at that as well. And of course, performance. Everybody wants a faster web server. And with competing web servers such as Tux, that is an HTTP daemon that is in the kernel of Linux, we actually have a lot of competition ahead of us, so we have to be very careful in this area. So one of the things that we actually did when we looked at IIS 5 and improving IIS 5 was we noticed that the code base itself is basically reached its limit. We could make improvements to it, but we noticed that we can only go so far with that code base. So we went back and thought about it again and ultimately decided that we were going to start from the ground up and basically build a completely new IIS. We went back, thought about it for a while. This took us a long time because we originally started thinking about patching up IIS 5, taping everything together, making it strongly integrated. And that's the reason why the original code name for this effort was called duct tape. It was supposed to be taking duct tape and tying everything together. Instead of putting everything together, we decided to break everything apart. But the name duct tape still lived on, if you will, and we're still calling this thing duct tape. So what we did in the new architecture is we basically took IIS, which you probably know as this monolithic structure that has almost everything under the sun in it, and broke it apart into 3, or actually better yet, 4 major components. The first one is the universal listener. It is an HTTP driver that is basically an HTTP parser, sender, and also a cache, basically giving us the performance that hopefully that we want. The second part is something known as the web admin service. This is probably better known as W3SVC, if you want to think about it that way. When you do a net start, that's what you're starting. WAS is an application control manager as well as a configuration manager. Now, if you're not very familiar with those terms, it's okay. I'm going to go into detail into these individual parts in just a moment. The third part, and probably the most important part, or probably more important part, I can't say most important, mainly because we can't function with any of the parts missing. The third part are the application pools or worker processes. Now, an application pool is nothing more than a concept, an abstract term that we use to basically define a name, not a namespace, but kind of like a block of thing that we can configure. That's it. If you really want to think about it, an application pool is a process. It's the same thing. It's analogous to a worker process. And in fact, I actually use the term interchangeably sometimes, which is actually pretty bad because it's not completely true in a web garden scenario on the far right that you're seeing there. But I'll go into that specifically, and hopefully you'll understand it. The worker processes is basically the workhorse of IIS. That is the thing that processes the request. If you'll notice, ISAPI extensions are loaded there, filters are loaded there, your ASP's running there, COM+ objects are running there. Everything is basically there now. The benefit to that, of course, is that that is completely isolated from WAS or UL. If anything happens in the worker process, we don't really care because we can always start up a new worker process. Those 3 components essentially make what was IIS. There is a 4th component. This component is INET Info, which originally housed W3SVC. We have removed that for better isolation and higher reliability. What is still within INET Info is, of course, the FTP service, SMTP, and NNTP. You also notice that the metabase, which originally existed in INET Info, continues to exist there. We've actually had customers tell us that they want to isolate the metabase from IIS. And we actually thought that that's a really good idea as well, so we kept it apart. So, as I've talked about, there are 4 major parts. The universal listener, I'm going to go into detail now. Basically, as I said, it is a listener, sender, and a cache. Now, you'll notice that the listener has something in it called a namespace mapper. What that basically is given a specific URL, it will point to a specific worker process. As I noted earlier, there could be multiple worker processes. And each individual worker process will actually process or respond to specific URLs, specific applications, or specific sites, depending on how you configure IIS. The namespace mapper is basically the engine that actually takes a request and routes it to the correct request. It becomes very, very important in a web garden scenario, and I'll talk about that later. Of course, there's the HTTP parser, which actually parses requests. And then there's a sender, which actually sends back responses so that any application abstracted above the UL API doesn't have to worry about an HTTP concept. All they think about is, I have a request, and I'm going to send a response. UL takes care of everything else for you. And probably the more interesting thing about UL actually is the response cache. The response cache is basically a cache that holds static or dynamic content, depending on what it is that you want to put in the cache, that is returned to the client very quickly. So if a request comes in and can be satisfied by the cache, well, we can respond immediately without ever having to hop into user space, thereby giving us much, much better performance. Sitting on top of all that, of course, is a UL API, very, very thin layer that allows you to basically talk to UL directly. Just to be very clear, nobody is actually allowed to put code into ul.sys. The reason being, of course, if you AV in here because of third-party code, you essentially crash the entire machine, since it is a kernel mode driver. We do not allow third-party code to go anywhere near this part of IIS. I've actually gone over most of this. The second part, of course, is the Web Admin Service, WAS. And WAS is actually, if you want to think about it, WAS is kind of like the parent, right? It doesn't do anything. It just sits there, and it manages all of the application, and it manages the configuration. It reads from the metabase all the information about which URL is serviced by which app pool, and then it talks to UL. It says, okay, you need to make sure that there are a certain number of queues because there are these many application pools. You got to make sure to do this, and you need to route correctly. And that's what it does. But the second part of WAS, but it's the first part on the slide, is probably the more important part. WAS is also a web application manager, and what that means is it starts up the worker processes when necessary. If it detects that something has failed in the worker process, then what it does is it kills it or tells it to stop and then creates a new one. It also recycles worker processes based on configuration. You can configure it 3 different ways. Based on the number of requests, such as please recycle the worker process every 10,000 requests. Based on uptime, you can also say things like recycle this worker process every 10 hours, or based on a specific time. So you can say recycle every 4 a.m. because you think that your web server has very low load at that time or whatever. These 3 things together, basically what we believe will ensure high availability on any web service. Again, the other thing that you should know is that there is no third-party code in WAS as well, because we cannot afford to have the web application manager crash. If it does, it can't start up new worker processes to serve up requests. Therefore, we don't allow anybody to put code in there. In fact, there's no API for you to do so. As I talked about earlier, application pools. Application pools, as I said, is nothing more than just a process boundary. It is a concept that we brought up. It is actually an interesting way of thinking about it because it is the single point of configuration. So if you wanted to configure something, you configure an app pool. You don't really configure a process. The reason is because of number 3, web gardens. I'm going to go a little bit over what a web garden is. How many actually are familiar with this term? Okay. It's kind of interesting. A web garden is basically multiple worker processes processing on the same namespace. Remember earlier I said that HTTP server /foo goes to a specific worker process that is managed by an app pool. That's basically the same as an app pool. But for example, if I have HTTP server /exchange, which is used by a lot of people, I may actually want to have multiple worker processes handling the exchange namespace. In that particular case, what's going to happen is, of course, UL is going to have a problem, right? Because it's going to go, well, which worker process do I route it to? And therein lies the URL namespace mapper. It becomes very, very important. UL actually has a concept of actually round robin and balancing across the web garden, and also having affinitization based on your session. So web garden, why do you even want to have like 8 worker processes serving up the same namespace? Well, think about it as a machine that has, say, 8 processors. It would be great if I can have 8 worker processes affinitized to the specific processors, thereby giving you much better utilization of each of the processors. We actually have seen that this has given us dramatic increase in terms of performance on NP machines. So we think that this is actually a really good thing. How this all ties back to an application pool is that even though there are 8 processes for this one namespace, it is still one app pool. So that's the only time when an app pool doesn't match up with one process. In a web garden scenario, one application pool can have multiple processes that is inside of it, if you want to think about it that way. There is no NT construct for an app pool, just so you know. It is just an abstract that we've created. The worker process, as I mentioned, is basically the workhorse of the application pool. It is basically, if you want to think about it, it's IIS as it is today. So you can have multiple, quote, versions of IIS running at the same time because they serve up different namespaces. Basically, it loads all your ISAPIs, whatever ISAPI is within that namespace. It loads the filters if it's necessary. And then, of course, all the applications that need to run in it. If you look at this model, you will notice that there is actually no such a thing as out of proc, mainly because everything is out of process. Everything is in its own process space. The benefit to that, of course, is much, much better reliability, much better isolation. And I'm probably hearing you guys think right now saying, oh my God, if everything's out of process, the performance is going to go to hell. Well, if you look at how it's actually architected, we actually don't suffer the out of process hit that you get in IIS-5. In IIS-5, what happens is when it goes into the INET-info process, realizes it's out of proc, you make a process hop to another process. Therein lies basically all the performance hit. If you look at the new architecture, there is no such a thing. UL will directly map to that process. And therefore, you actually basically have the exact same performance as a, quote, in-proc app in Windows 2000. So we give you the out-of-process isolation and the reliability, but you don't actually get the hit of IIS-5's out-of-proc performance. So that, we believe, is going to give you a really, really strong gain. Do we have any questions so far? Wow, you guys are either not staying awake, because by this time yesterday I was like stopped for like 5 minutes to 10 minutes because of all the questions. Yes? All right, someone's awake. I'm happy now. Okay. The question is, can we compare this with our competitor's architecture? I'm going to be very frank. This architecture was derived from the Apache model, but you will note that we actually do a lot of things that Apache does not do. So we derived from it, but what we did was enhanced it and made it even better than the Apache model. The 3 ways of configuring how a worker process is killed and restarted, Apache doesn't have that. Our worker processes, the fact that we can have threads within each of the worker process, Apache does not have that. The web application manager has the config information and how we do our configuration. Apache does not have that as well. So we have enhanced it and made it even better. Any other questions? Oh, sorry. Way over there. The question is, any reason why we did not extract SMTP? You are going to love this. Even though SMTP is shipped within the INET-info process, we don't own that code. The Exchange team owns that code. So whether they want to do this is up to them. We actually have no control over that code base. Yes?
Well, kind of going along with the same question, protocol on top of that.
Yep.
So if I wanted to write a socket program, I couldn't, kind of feedback on the listener here before I get the protocol.
So the question is a universal listener really a universal listener? It's actually not. It's a universal HTTP listener. We listen to HTTP requests only. So for example, FTP, which is a completely different protocol, SMTP is another protocol, we don't actually support them. One of the things that you should know is that HTTP now has surpassed FTP's functionality. So you can do everything that you want to do in FTP in HTTP. SMTP, or a mail protocol, is actually also can be done via HTTP as well. That is actually one of the reasons why we decided to go with the HTTP universal listener as opposed to a universal listener. It makes UL very small, very fast, very robust, and it doesn't have to hit basically every single protocol in the world. We're very, very focused. Any other questions? Yes? The question is, how are threads managed within the worker process? Same way IIS managed their threads. Basically, we spin up, I believe the default, no, because we throttle it, so I'm not actually sure. We basically spin up more threads as necessary based on what's called within the worker process. The question is, can you configure a default web thread pool? Yes, there is a default. I believe it is configured at 20 right now, but I don't know for sure. I can look in the config file and show you. Any other? Yes? The question is, now that we've moved things into the kernel, especially I'm assuming you're talking about the cache, how aggressively are we competing with other parts of the system? We actually, the cache is it is actually a dynamic cache. That's actually an interesting point. It is a dynamic cache in that there is no configurable setting. We will use as much as we can get. And so if you wanted to have a dedicated IIS machine, then you would dump a lot of RAM on it and have IIS take over, basically, all of it. So we are constrained only by memory. It is not constrained by configuration. So, but that is actually a very good point, and I might actually take that back and see if we want to do something like that. I'm not sure, but right now it's not configurable. Any other questions? Excellent. That means you guys are still awake. All right. So I've shown you the three components that basically make up IIS. I'm going to actually now show you exactly how we're going to put this together and actually service a request. So when you restart IIS or when you reboot the web server, hopefully you'll never have to do this again, WAS will actually read from the metabase and get all of this configuration information, such as how many app pools need to be started, blah, 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 which URLs go where, and we read it into the config manager. We then push that down into UL so that UL is aware of all the app pools, all of the applications, websites, whatever, that it needs to basically listen on as well. Once that's done, basically IIS has started. Now you'll notice that there is actually no process right now that actually handles a request. UL can handle a request only if it's served out by the cache, and WAS doesn't really do any request handling. When the first request comes into UL parses it, does the right thing, and then it says, okay, I need to route it to a worker process. Now, depending, of course, on your system, whether it's already been running or not, WAS will spin up worker processes as necessary. Once a worker process is spun up, UL then routes the request to the appropriate worker process that is then handled and then, of course, responded to through the sender through UL. That basically is how IIS works today. Very simple. There's nothing really magical about it, and that's about it. Yes?
For the WAS to be able to recycle a process based on the number of requests,
Mm-hmm.
communication between UL and the WAS to tell us how many requests on the process.
The question is, for WAS to recycle worker processes based on number of requests, how does it actually know how many requests has been passed to it? It's actually pretty interesting. We don't actually talk to UL with that information. We go directly to the worker process and say, how many have you handled, by the way? And then after a while, once WAS tells us, once the worker process says, oh, I've handled X number, and that X number has reached that threshold, then WAS will say, bye-bye, and then restart it. So we talk directly to the worker process, not to UL. Yeah, the question is, how often do we talk to it? We actually ping worker processes periodically. Yes? The question is, seems like there's a lot of context switching between user and kernel mode. Well, the truth is, it's not any more than IIS, because in IIS and Windows 2000, you have to go into the kernel when a packet comes in, and then it jumps into user's page, which was IIS. So you're not going to incur anything more than you have in IIS 5. In fact, you can't, because everything has to come through kernel anyway. So we don't actually get any hit in terms of performance. In fact, we are actually better than IIS today. We know that for a fact. Any other questions? Excellent. Process recycling. I want to go a little bit over this, mainly because this is probably the most important part of the new worker process. So one of the things I'd like to show you is, so say we have the web server up and running, and everything's fine, everything's beautiful, and bam, an application within one of your worker process, basically AVs, deref 0, divide by 0, I don't know. It does something really, really bad. AVs, goodbye. WAS goes, I don't really care. If you killed yourself, I'll just restart a new one, right? Now, just so that you are clear, we don't actually restart a new one until a request actually comes in. So we don't actually waste the system resources unless we actually need it. But we do restart web services if one of the worker process does die and a request comes in and it needs to go to that worker process. Now let's look at worker process 2. Have you ever had this little problem? I think, I've personally, never experienced it myself. But, this problem is very simple, right? All of a sudden, your web server just doesn't respond. You can request it, and, your browser just sits there and does nothing. And you're like, what's going on? And then you check IIS, and IIS is still running. CPU doesn't seem to be, pegged or anything, but it's just not responding. In this particular case, at least in Windows 2000, there's not much that you can do. This is actually where people actually don't like us really much, because they can't diagnose the problem, and the only thing they can do is restart the web service. Well, in a sense, that's exactly what we do. If we notice that the worker process is not responding, as I said, we periodically ping them, not only for information, we actually ask them if they're alive and well. If they don't respond to that, we go, you're not doing very well, are you? And then we kill it, because it's sleeping or it's doing something. Like all of you are probably, hopefully, not sleeping in this. But the good thing is we won't kill you. WAS kills worker processes. Then we have, of course, the third application, which is actually doing really, really well. It's serving up, 600 requests per second, having great time, and it's just doing wonderfully. After a while, we kill it anyway. I know you guys are saying, why are we doing that? Well, the truth is we really don't know if an application is doing really, really well and if it's going to maintain that for a long time. The reason, of course, is if there was a badly written application inside that worker process and it's leaking memory, you know what? Running it forever is not going to be a good thing, because it's going to consume your system resources, and it's going to consume it in very, very small increments. In fact, that's actually the whole basis with this new architecture, is that we don't trust client code. We really don't trust people putting in code in our worker process. And so we just go, you know what? We're just going to kill you every few minutes if we have to, and restart you so that we can start on a very fresh IIS. In fact, a lot of people today do what is called prophylactic restarts of IIS. Well, guess what? If you really want to do that, you can do it this way. You don't have to sit there and hit the reset button every few days. Yes? Oh, I love it. Have you been peeking at the slides? Oh, okay. All right. So the question is, how exactly do you actually restart a worker process? There are two modes that you can restart in. One mode is known as overlapping rotation. And this mode is basically when a worker process has reached a threshold, like served out the number of requests that it needs to, or it's reached the time to recycle, we will stop sending requests to the current worker process, start up a new one, and then send all new requests to the new worker process while the old one finishes what it needs to do. Once it's all done, then we issue a terminate, and so that it can actually very gracefully shuts down the old one, and at the same time have a new one in its place to serve subsequent requests. Of course, that's the reason why it's called overlapping rotation, because there are actually two worker processes now that are handling the same namespace, but it's not really a web garden. The second mode is non-overlapping rotation, and that is actually not recommended. The reason being, what we actually do in that case is we tell the worker process to stop accepting requests. We stop sending it requests, but we don't spin up a new worker process until the old one has died. The only reason why we're doing this is mainly because there are ISAPIs out there that don't work really well if there are multiple instances of it running at the same time. So we actually give you this option. Now you're going to be wondering, okay, what happens to the requests that are coming in at this time? Well, they're actually queued in UL. You won't actually lose any of the requests unless, of course, there are a lot of requests coming in and you flood the queue that's in UL before the new worker process can come up. But that depends on the traffic, and if you have a lot of traffic and stuff like that, we would probably advise that you configure it so that you have overlapping rotation as opposed to non-overlapping. Yes? Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you, I assume, how do you know if a worker process is not responding? Well, there are two things. One, WASP periodically is the one that pings them. It's not UL. What UL does actually, it's kind of interesting. UL doesn't actually push requests up to the worker process. UL puts it on its queue, and then the worker process is the one that calls HTTP request accept. If it has the ability to call that, then it's going to pick up the request. And of course, like I said, it could actually pick up the request and not do anything with it. And that's where WASP kicks in, because WASP will actually ping it and say, are you doing work? Are you doing work? If you're not, goodbye. So in those cases where there are some requests that were picked up by the worker process and wasn't done, or like nothing happened to it, those requests do get lost, because we do issue a kill to the worker process that doesn't respond. But it wasn't responding in the first place, so there's nothing we can really do for those requests that were already picked up. And then we start up a new one. Yes?
You're setting up like these thresholds or these criteria for the second process. What happens like
Excellent question. When you're setting up recycling, what happens to users with session state? In these particular cases, if the worker process was recycled at the time that you're halfway through a session, you do lose your session. The way to get around this is we recommend that you stop, and actually that's what we've been recommending in IIS 5 anyway, mainly because in IIS 5, if the web server crashed, you lose your session. It's the same problem. What we actually now recommend is that you put your session state not within the session state of ASP, which is within proc, if you really want, persistent session state, but instead put it in the SQL Server database. The second way to do it, of course, is to use ASP+. ASP+ has a completely new model where session is not stored within the IIS process. It's actually stored in a session process that's outside. There are, of course, advantages to one and advantages to the other. And based on your specific application, you may choose one over the other. Actually, there was a question back there by a gentleman that I missed. Ah, excellent. Back there? You are so good. I'm serious. You must be peeking into like future slides. We do actually, we will, the question is, do we log requests so that you can access the information via WMI? We actually, IIS 6 will have an IIS WMI provider. I will actually go into that in detail a little bit later on. You had a question up front? Yes.
So if one of the worker processes has somebody request queue and then it crashes, all those requests are lost.
The question is, if the worker process has requests queued and the worker process crashes, are the requests lost? The worker process doesn't have a queue. The queues are actually resides in UL. So if the worker process dies, the queue still remains. A new worker process starts up. They start picking up requests. Worker process will only pick up requests when it has the ability to handle that request. So the requests that are already being handled by the worker process, those are the ones that you lost, not the ones in the UL queue. Yes? The question is, do you need a specific queue or a separate queue for each process? The answer is yes. Way back there. The question is there a way to override override the killing of the process? It's actually very interesting that you asked that question. We originally thought that that was a really bad idea, but we had so many customers ask us for that when we presented our architecture that we actually provide one other way, though we do not recommend it. There is a way for you to say, do not recycle a worker process. In that case, WAS will then leave it alone. And if that thing crashes, we will not do anything. So it is not exactly beneficial to do something like that. Though one of the things to note is that though we won't recycle it on a periodic basis, if it does crash and it goes away, WAS does detect that and will start up a new one. So it is a benefit for you to try and do something like that. But because of the non-proactive recycling that we do, you probably won't get as nice of a clean up as we would if we did a proactive recycling. Okay? There's one more question back there. Sorry.
Going back to when IIS starts up, are you able to configure so that start worker processes before you get a request?
The question is, can you start up a worker process before you start up a request, before you actually get the first request? The current answer is no. We do not start up any worker processes until the first request comes in. If you think that it is an important feature, we did have one customer ask us for that, but we feel that you can go around it because as a startup script, what you can do is you can actually ping yourself with a bogus request, such as an options or a head, and if you do that, you'll basically start up the worker process. So we felt that there's a workaround. If you feel otherwise and you feel that it is very important to have this feature for a specific customer that you have in mind, please feel free to come afterwards, and I would be very happy to talk about that. Yes? Okay. No more questions? Okay. So, of course, the most important thing I wanted to let you know is that the web service is always running when we do this type of recycling. Way back there. Standing up. I'll answer both questions, don't worry. No, it will not. I assume that your question that you're asking is whether I can stop recycling, and actually answer that a little bit earlier. So if you feel that your application is running fine and you don't want to recycle it, don't. No, I should be very clear on that. You can configure each worker process differently. So I should be very clear on that. I apologize if I wasn't. Each worker process can be configured different ways. One can be non-recycled, the other recycled based on time, the third recycled based on request, the fourth recycled based on hour of the day. So you can do that. So I'd actually like to show you the new worker process that can be run and stuff like that. If you'll notice that IIS today runs the new IIS, IIS 6 runs on Whistler. You'll notice that IIS today runs the new IIS, IIS 6 runs on Whistler. You'll notice that it's on the bottom right-hand corner, and you'll notice that right now there's really not much anything can handle. I actually wanted this demo to be done on 2 screens, but unfortunately we don't have 2 screens, so I'm going to have to switch back and forth. So you have to bear with me for a second. So what I'm going to do on this computer, okay, I'm not going to do that, sorry. So all I'm doing on this computer is I'm going to make a request to the other machine. When I hit enter, I'm going to flip back to this machine for a sec. You'll notice something very interesting. That is a worker process. Now, of course, you should all be panicking right now and going, oh my God, are you going to pop up a window every single time I make a request? No, this is check build. This is debug build. I'm only showing this to you to show you that a worker process has just started up. So please feel assured that no window is going to pop up when you get the RTM version. I'm only showing you that we're popping up worker processes when a request comes in. When you get to the IE application that was running earlier, I made a request, and of course, a request responded to this ASP page. Note, just so you know, ASP is running in IIS 6. We are responding correctly. And, you know, hopefully we are, so far we're running like rock solid. So, remember that we talked about how worker processes can handle different namespace? Well, you'll notice that there are actually 2 worker processes that start up. And you're like, well, wait a minute, why are there 2 that start up, though I made just 1 request? It's kind of funny. I completely forgot that this page, of course, as you'll notice, has, let's see, let's go back for a second. This page has a background and has an image. I completely forgot that I put the image directory, the images and the background in an images directory that's outside, and it's in another app pool. So what happened is the first request went, got the ASP page. That was in the app pool. On this page, you will notice this thing. It says in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see van app pool 1, WP3. It made that first request. That's the one that got started. And then it realized, wait, I need to make requests to the pictures as well. And of course, it made it to another location, which is the images directory. And the images directory, of course, is located in the default app pool, which is the one that we have by default. So 2 worker processes start up on that 1 request. And now the question is, so I'm going to go to another directory. This one was test. And I have another one called test2, which is actually configured to run in a completely different app pool because I just wanted it to be better isolated or whatever. So I'm going to make a request to test2. And this thing is not behaving like it should. And you'll notice that a 3rd worker process has just popped up. It's called van app pool 2, you know, test 2 so that I can remember which app pool is going where. So this is basically how we actually start up processes that handles the requests and everything. If you'll notice, of course, that you know, we've got all of our, in this debug case, we show you all the modules that are loaded and stuff like that. So I'm going to demonstrate, of course, a catastrophic failure. In fact, I'm going to demonstrate a really huge catastrophic failure that brought down all my worker processes. Now, of course, if you'll notice, IIS doesn't spin up a new one immediately because there's no new request. It's already done its job. It's happy. IIS goes, I don't really care. There's nothing that I need to do here. So what I'm going to do is, of course, somebody comes in, hits a refresh. And again, it's the exact same page. What will happen is it comes up. The first one that started up was van app pool 2 because I just hit refresh. And of course, it needed the default app pool as well because I was requesting images from the images directory. So this ability to basically recycle itself, I actually wanted to be able to show you the recycling, but on my machine, it's set to recycle every 10,000 requests. So we're going to have to sit here and hit refresh for a long time before I can show you that it recycles on a long basis. However, one thing that I will show you throughout the duration of this talk is that you will notice after a while that this app pool will go away. So in addition, if the app pool remains idle for a while, WAS will actually kill it and say, you don't need to do anything. Why consume the system resource that you're doing? Go away. So I'm going to leave this up, and then when it goes away, I'll show you. But in the meantime, let's get back, and I can talk about more of how, more about IIS 6. Yes? I'm sorry, I did not hear the question. The question is, can you set the idle time? Basically, that recycling period is nothing more than the period. Remember I said there were 3 ways to configure IIS? There's a time when, you know, after X number of time, you need to shut down. Because I said that there's 3 ways. That's basically the time. It's sitting there for 10 minutes, and you said recycle every 10 minutes, so it kills it. Yes? Excellent question. I'm assuming you're saying worker process, mainly because the app pool doesn't really have a construct. The question is, does the worker process run within the COM+ application model? The answer is no. The worker process itself is a new type of process. It is not a COM+ application. But I'm sure you're probably wondering, well, does my COM+ app work within it? Absolutely. We have made the integration point where we don't actually live within COM+, but we host COM+. So that's a little bit of a difference, but we actually can make it work. In fact, it does work today. That's a good thing. Okay. So, as I said, there are 4 major components to the new IIS. The 4th one is actually the new config system. Now, I'm sure all of you just absolutely love the Metabase, right? Oh, come on. It's great. It's really robust. It never corrupts. And, you know, you can always back it up and move it onto a new machine. That's what all of our customers tell us. The exact opposite. So we went back and we looked at the Metabase and we said, how can we make this better for our customers? How can we make this a very cool config system that scales, that does well, it performs, and it's actually easy to work with? So we actually looked back at our design reasoning, and you'll be very surprised. We actually have this information. You know, we went all the way back to IIS 4 and looked at the design paper that actually said why we decided to design a Metabase as opposed to another thing. And it's actually very interesting because back in the days of NTOP, we actually looked at the design of a config system, and we actually had 2. And they were actually neck and neck with each other. One was to design an opaque store, known as the Metabase, and the other one was a text file. You'd be very surprised that the design was actually, it was neck and neck. I believe the final decision came by one person in a huge meeting, and it was 50-50, and somebody just put their foot down, added a vote in, and it was 49-51. But we looked at that design and we said, you know, text-based config, not a bad idea, you know, may not be such a bad idea. So we've decided to go back and remove the metabase.bin file and replace it with a text-based configuration file so that it is human readable and human editable. It is based in XML form so that actually it can be parsed and it can be actually transported like data. It supports the ADSI schema as ADSI does, as well as all of the ADSI scripts or the admin base object scripts that you have. What we've also added, in addition to just a text-based configuration system, is that we've added some other features to this new config system, such as a Metabase rollback. So there is a location in the Metabase now, today, that we actually can roll back into a previous known configuration. So say you made a change, or somebody made a change that you didn't authorize, and you go, wait a minute, what the heck is this? Somebody has changed your configuration. It's very easy. You go roll back to a specific version. The number of backups that you can have that's done automatically for you is configured. On my machine, it's configured to be 10. You can configure it to 100 or whatever you want it to be, and we'll roll back as necessary. There's also something known as edit while running support. And what is that? What it really means is that while the web service is running, I can go into the text file, make an edit, save, and IIS will immediately pick up that change and run with it, literally. And then, of course, there's probably the most important feature to a lot of ISPs out there, and that's the import-export tool. One of the things that probably is in IIS 5 is that I cannot actually take a Metabase and move it onto a different machine. The reason behind that is actually pretty interesting. There's nothing wrong with the Metabase format itself. What happens is that the Metabase, because it contains information that is very sensitive, such as usernames and passwords, the Metabase is encrypted. However, we encrypt it using the machine key. The machine key, of course, is specific to the machine. In fact, it's specific to the machine and OS. So what happens is when you back up the Metabase and say you upgrade your OS, clean install NT, you get a different machine key. Guess what? With a different machine key, you can't decrypt the Metabase file. Without that ability, your Metabase is lost forever. Try to move it onto a different machine, you have exactly the same problem. So in IIS 6, what we've done is we added a new function, which is a backup with password, so that you can actually back up a Metabase with a password as opposed to the machine key. It will then be encrypted with the password. You can then export it, or what we call restore it, using the password that you've just used to encrypt it. Now you then have the ability to take a metabase, put it in a backup, take it to another machine, plop it onto the new machine, and it works, with some caveats that I'll go over right now. But you had a question there. Never a dumb question. The question is there an option to put this in the Active Directory? It was considered, but due to time constraints in this release, it will not be available. We still use it as a text file, and there are actually other reasons that I can discuss with you offline that specifically say why we can't do it, because there are actually problems with that. And I can go over that with you individually if you want. So as I said, you can take a metabase. I'm sorry, go ahead. What advantage does XML have over the metabase.bin file? Because it is human readable and human editable, anybody now can write a Perl script or VB script or JScript to modify the file directly without having to use any of our APIs. This was the #1, I'm sorry? I was just about to go into that. This is the #1 request of all ISPs in the world. Every ISP we go to are saying, can I not open up the metabase file with text? And the answer is, of course, no. When we presented this to Interland and HostPro, and I believe, who were the other ISPs that we visited? There was one huge one in Atlanta, Florida, and stuff like that. Basically, this solves 95% of their problems. 95 with this one feature that we added. Yes? The question is, can you put the metabase on a network share and have a bunch of machines look at it? There is no reason why you can't, other than that today we're only looking in one location to look for metabase.bin. What you can do is put a link there, a symbolic link, to a network share and use the same thing, or you can use replication to replicate your metabase across machines. There's not an issue there. Any other questions? Ha! Question is, how do you secure the passwords if it's an XML file? Excellent, excellent question. The passwords within the XML file are actually not in clear text. They are hashed. It is secure. And of course, we actually do secure the passwords using the machine key when it's on the machine. If you do an Xcopy and you move it to another machine, then you will need to actually call our import-export tool, because that will actually import it correctly, decrypt it, and when we export it, we'll encrypt it using the new machine key. You have to use our APIs to do that one. But using those APIs is not a big deal to a lot of our customers. Yes? The question is, why did we build a rollback functionality into the metabase instead of using something like SourceSafe? There is no reason why you can't use SourceSafe. In fact, the biggest thing that Hotmail wanted was source control on IIS, and they actually plan to use their own source control to back up and restore all of their content as well as the metabase. The only reason why we did this is for ease of use for a customer, so that they have it right out the box of Whistler. And it basically adds value. It doesn't really do everything that a source control system will do for you. All it does is you point it at a file and we restore that file. That's it. So it gives you limited functionality, but it does give you added value to an existing IIS server. Yes? Is there a tool that actually checks your changes? There is a tool that actually makes sure that you have valid XML. That's it. Because there is no such thing as trying to figure out if you did something right. For example, if you change the access right flag to be true, well, we don't know if you really meant that or was that a mistake. The only thing that we can do is we verify that you have the correct XML and you're not breaking. If you have the wrong combination of parameters, what happens? IIS will ignore things that it does not understand. We will pick up the changes that is changed and that we understand. And if you did something wrong, we ignore it and we notify you by writing an event into the event log that says, something is wrong with your metabase. We suggest you look at it. Say that. I'm sorry, I did not hear the question. Is there a change to the I username? The answer is no. Remains exactly the same. Any other questions? Yes. Well, that actually does encrypting passwords within the machine, within the metabase, prevent a common config file across machines. And actually, I was just about to go into that. Thank you. Yes, it does. But in fact, you can't have a common config file across machines. Guess what? There are machine-specific settings, such as SSL certificates, such as IP address port bindings, such as host headers. These things, if you move it to another machine, you'll probably have to reconfigure anyway, such as directories. Unless those machines are exactly identical, your directory is going to have to change, so your vRoots are going to change. So even though there are other information around you that are not encrypted, they're still machine-specific. And so to make a common config file for all machines, we actually believe it's not something that we as IIS can actually help you with, mainly because there are just too many variables that we can't control. But we give you the ability so that when you do import exports, you can actually make changes during the time, so that when you say hit a button and deploy to, say, cluster number 3, and cluster number 3 has different configs, you can actually make the changes before you actually deploy there. And again, it actually is facilitated because you have a text-based config file. Yes? I'm sorry, I did not understand that question. Excellent question. Will the config system of existing applications continue to work? You betcha. If we break anybody, we will be in such a deep doo-doo that we would not exist. No, we absolutely ensure that all of our existing APIs continue to work. We add a new API that you can use, but all existing ones continue to work as they are. So trust me, that was a big issue. We guarantee that that still continues to work. Yes? The question is, if we have some of the new APIs to do the import-export, why not just keep it as an opaque file? It's actually a very good question, and we actually had to, as I said, that's the reason why it was a very hard decision to make. Though we have the import-export tool and all of the things that we've told people about, we still have customers, especially ISPs. They're the ones who actually have the major problems, that don't like the fact that they have to use our API in order to access the metabase. They said, I don't mind to run an import-export tool when I do backups, but if I need to make a change to configuration, I don't want to have to use an ADSI interface or a base object interface. It's also true when they came up to us and talked to us and says, our ops folks are not people who know how to program. They know how to open a text file, but they don't know how to open up your metabase.bin using get object and then set w3svc/1/root/access right. They just don't know that. So because of those reasons, we felt that it was necessary not only to provide those APIs, but also to provide them with a text-based config file so that they can open up the text file and change a specific setting if it's necessary. It's also helpful to migrate people from the Apache Unix world where everything is text-based config. Is that a question or a stretch? Oh man, do you really want me to get into that? The question is, how do you preserve, I assume, how do you preserve different changes, that's made via the UI or via the APIs at the same time you're making changes to the XML file? You're going to love this. We actually have a complex, my God, I had to learn that like a few days ago. We actually have a system that does, and it's very complex, and if you really want to learn about it, I'll tell you afterwards. But we guarantee you that in some cases you do lose one of the changes, depending on what you do. But in other cases, we actually make sure that you don't lose any of them, and we merge the changes if we can. If we can't, then you do lose some of the changes, which is the reason why we really recommend not having multiple admins like 10 modifying the metabase at exactly the same time. In fact, you can't do that in IIS 5 anyway because we lock the metabase in that specific occasion. So we actually don't see this as a very impactful scenario, though we do put in the precautionary measures to prevent losing data and losing changes that you've made. Yes? That's exactly what we do. We actually do a diff between what we know and what you've made changes to, and we only upload the changes that you have made. Any other questions? Great. So I'd like to actually show you the new XML file. That's basically, hopefully. So you're probably all familiar with where the metabase lives today. It's in, INET serve directory, and it's known as metabase.bin. If you go to the INET serve directory in IIS 6, you'll notice that there's the metaback directory. Now, the metaback directory is where we store all the rollbacks that's necessary. In this case, I think I have about 3 in there because this web server hasn't been up, that long, and I haven't been making changes to it. And then, of course, there's the metabase.xml. That is your metabase file. You'll notice that there's a tilde file there. Don't ignore that. The tilde file only exists because I use Emacs, and Emacs always creates a tilde file as a backup for you. Then, of course, there's metadata.dll that actually reads it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up. Okay, I'm just killing word wrap. So basically, here is the XML file. And if you'll notice, we start saying it's a configuration. We have our own namespace. And then that, you're going to love this. That little space between those two cursors basically houses all the information that is global to IIS, including what you'll notice, the session key. By the way, that session key is the machine key encrypt. Sorry, take that back. Just took it back. All right. Ignore what I said earlier. That is a binary blob that contains information that is pertinent to the machine key. That's all you need to know about it. Because if you really want me to go into that, I'm going to confuse the living daylights out of you. So one of the things I'd like to show you is edit while running. So the web server, as you know, I didn't touch this machine, and guess what? The 2 worker processes are gone, because it's actually gone to the timeout period, and WAS has actually asked it to be recycled. So one of the things I'd like to show you in this particular case is edit while running. So the web server was running, as you notice. I didn't do anything to this poor machine. And what I'm actually going to do, so let's do this, and I'm going to go to test. So if you notice again, 2 worker processes has just started up on the new machine, and now I have, of course, a default web page because I went to test instead of hello. Now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say, wait, and this is actually very good for application deployment, right? So say you have a default home page and you've uploaded a new default home page, and you've made sure that you've tested everything and everything's a go and everything's great, and now you're ready to make that switch. Well, how do you do it? You go into the virtual directory and you change the default homepage, because you can also say, what is the default? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to look for w3svc/1/root/test. And here, you'll notice that I have a default doc. It's hello.asp. But now I have a new file up there. It's called default.asp. And what's really cool about it is I can make the change right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say save, go back to my WIS, and I'm going to hit, and of course IE loves this little This is actually a bug by IE, not by us. I've always seen this problem. I'm sorry? It is really much to cache. Yuck. I apologize for that. I wish we could fix that. I've always asked them to fix that, but they don't. It was test, right? Ugh. All right, this is not happy. This one? The right side. All the way to the right. Oh! Now, let's do one thing. All right, what I'm going to do. I'm going to start up IE on the same box. Unless my Metabase broke, which it shouldn't have because I've been doing this for forever. Of course, it could break. Let's take a look at the Metabase. Okay. Metabase.xml. Default doc for a root test is default.asp. I'm going to kill it. I just closed the window. So, by the way, you had asked whether old APIs work. So, ADS util, how many people are familiar with that? Great. ADS util uses the ADSI objects in order to get its information. So what I'm doing is actually using a different way to look at it. All I'm doing is taking a look at what the default doc for test is. And default doc is hello.asp, which is not good. Why? Un momento, por favor. We shall do this again. I'm sorry? Oh, come on. Give me a break. All right, let's see. Did I do something really, really bad? Oh, who did this? No, edit while running is turned on. So that's the other thing that I was a little bit worried. I need to make sure edit while running is turned on. The text file is read. That's the other thing I want to show you is that MD-util, which uses the base objects, hello.asp, default load file. Why is it doing that to me? Do not do that to me. This worked yesterday. Give me one moment. Let me think. Aha! Okay, let me try that again. All right, fine. To humor you, but see, I don't have Notepad configured so that you can actually see it very well. So I apologize for that. Here we go. Let's see if I can find it. w3svc/1/root/test. All right, here we go. Am I looking at the wrong directory? Virtual directory, custom, virtual directory, web test 2. All right, give me 1 second. Default ASP. No, I'm definitely editing the right metabase. Of course. No, I am. All right, let's see. Okay. What was it? Default.asp? Default.asp. Of course, the funny thing could be that I did something bad and it's not picking up my changes when I typed this wrong or something. Well, anyway, we'll see. Alt F. Sorry? I could look at the event log. That is correct. There we go. Give it one more go. Control F5. This is not a happy thing here. Hello.asp. Why is it not picking it up? Don't say that. Anybody who says that, I'm going to like get you afterwards. I'll go to your session and I'll heckle you or something. All right. Give me one more try here. One more thing that I actually wanted to try, which may or may not do anything here. Search for hello.asp. I'll do that. Nope. So hello.asp does not exist anymore. One thing that I'm dead serious. This is really weird. 1 second here. Huh? I will do that in 1 second. Who said what? I missed that one. Trust me, I know exactly how this feels. Give me 1 second here. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go into the meta back directory. So that's interesting. What's happening is it's not backing up my changes because it's supposed to have backed it up. Give me 1 second. Don't do that. Okay, thank you. So the file has changed, but the metabase has not picked it up. So, sorry, say that again? No, it has. 9:42 a.m. It's very different from 8:20 a.m. this morning when I touched it first. So the question that you have is, does ADS util look at the in-memory representation? So as you probably know, there's the metabase, and then there is actually an in-memory representation. But whenever with edit while running turned on, what happens is if I ever touch the metabase file, it should actually be read into the metabase immediately. The fact that it's not being read into the metabase, it's an interesting little issue that I would like to figure out why, because I've never had this thing go wrong with me before. Un momento, I can figure this out. No, it cannot. It doesn't know about that file, and it doesn't know that that file has exists. Well, it should reflect the same thing as ADS util when I do this. So let me just try it one more time. Hello.asp. It just... Well, I can, but that would be really, really bad, wouldn't it? Because I'm trying to demo, you know, edit while running so that you don't have to use ADS util. That completely defeats the whole purpose. But what I am going to do is I'm going to do this, md util enum w3svc /1/root/test. Let me take a look at test 2. Test 2 is hello. Wait, did I? Uh-oh. Okay, I'm just going to try one thing. Hello.asp, what page does that go to? Okay, so that's hello. The page I wanted to go to is this page. That's the page that it's supposed to go to. Okay, so now let me take a look again at it. Well, the question is whether, you know, it's enabled. If you look at the metabase file,
Yeah, you probably can't turn on edit while running and have it, if it was 0, you have to shut down.
correct. If that, actually you don't. You'd be very surprised what we can do without having to shut down the web server. But the thing is, you will note that I actually didn't set this to 1. This was already 1 when the web server started, so this actually should work. So I apologize. I actually do not know why this is not working, but time is running. I will actually like to move on. I will come back to this if we have time. I do not know why this is not working the way that I expect it to be working. But like you said, welcome to the field, right? Yes. IIS Global is global to the entire server. It is not per site. Each site has its own information. That would be the site settings. If you change those, that affects the site. But you cannot change global settings because those affect the entire server. So if you change edit while running, it affects the entire server.
I didn't know if you could turn it off for a special site.
You cannot turn off edit while running for specific namespaces. Okay? So one of the things I wanted to make sure that I add back and make sure everybody is clearly aware of is that we are backwards compatible. All ADSI capabilities and admin-based objects continue to work. So all your code that works today that accesses the metabase will continue to work. Yes? I'm not sure that that's actually a problem. The question is, with an XML file, you know, how are you going to maintain this backwards compatibility moving forward? There's actually no reason why this doesn't work just because it's an XML file, right? The store is behind and it's opaque to the user. If you use the APIs, and they can do that, and they can use the APIs. You can't change the XML structure. We guarantee you, we won't, even if we change the structure, which we have, we guarantee all your APIs will still continue to work. So the question is, if I have access to XML, if I change the XML structure, will that not break JScripts or Perl scripts that are running? Absolutely, which is why we will not change the structure after it's released. We have no choice. That's the price that we pay to moving into a text-based configuration file. In addition to the basically the new configuration system, we actually added WMI support. And so it's a WMI provider that actually allows you one other scripting way to get into IIS. This is basically the goal of it, of course, is having one unified scripting interface into all of the system, so that you don't just use WMI to access IIS configuration information, but also other parts of the system, such as registry, such as system logs and log files and stuff like that. It is very similar to ADSI, but it actually has more features than ADSI. One of them, probably most salient one, is that you can actually query using WMI. Probably one of the things that's the most interesting thing that we heard from a customer was, you know, the problem is I have 5,000 sites on a single box. And a customer calls in and says, I need something changed on vanvan.com. That's a problem, because I have no idea what site vanvan.com is. Mainly because the way that I change the metabase is I have to go in and I have to say w3svc/3096. And that doesn't really help me if I need to change vanvan.com. The only way to do that today is you enumerate the entire metabase and you grep. That's a pretty lousy solution for our customers. But with WMI, you can actually query the metabase. You can ask it for information like that. WMI also has events, and we actually have more events today, and they're actually tiered. Is it a warning? Is it a flaw? I mean, is it an error? Is it a fatal error? So that you can actually filter out what is it that you want to know about it. And of course, WMI is standards-based. With that, I actually would like to show you the WMI provider running. So let's say on your machine, what you have is, you know, you're a new admin and you want to come into the machine and you want to make sure that you have configured it, or at least no part of your metabase is open for attack. So in this particular file, what I'm actually doing is I'm getting the object. As you can tell, it looks very much like ADSI. I call getObject. Noticeably before, this would have been IIS, and then, you know, lm/w3svc/root, all that good stuff. You notice here that it's Win Management. This is the WMI namespace. We grab the IIS version 2 object, which basically was our LM object. And what we do is, you notice here, it says the object provider execute query select star from IIS web common directories where access right equals true. This is where I'm basically searching my entire web server and trying to figure out where I have write access turned on, basically to try and see if anything's broken or anybody has done anything bad. I run this script, and when it comes back, because it needs to go to this machine to actually get this information, it says you have 2 virtual directories that have write bit turn to true. So what I can do is, say if I was using ADS util, I can say set w3svc/1/root/test to access write false. That is set. I now run this 2 again, and you'll notice it'll come back now saying you only have 1 virtual directory. So the benefit to that is that you actually have a WMI that you can query, and you can actually use this to do a lot of the work that we couldn't do with ADSI today. So we talked about how customer needs have changed and how people are really demanding reliability. With the new worker process model and the application, we feel that we're giving you much, much better isolation without the performance hit, and the recycling will hopefully give you much higher availability. The text-based configuration file will hopefully give you easier management. We had a little bit of problem. We're going to try and figure out what's going on there. And the WMI provider will give you a unified scripting interface to the entire system, thereby hopefully giving you much better management. Scalability. The new config system will actually give you more sites per box. I'll actually give you numbers a little bit later. WebGarden will actually give you much better processor utility. And of course, performance. With direct routing, you remove the outer process hit. UL cache actually responds much faster. I don't have a slide that says it, but basically our initial test in the pre-beta about 2 or a month ago, I think, was when we did 1 test. And so far, we're about a little bit less than twice the performance of IIS. Our new config system has a much faster startup time based on the number of sites on a box. And of course, WebGardens will actually give you much better throughput on nproc machines. Yes?
How does that twice the performance of IIS? How does that compare with TUX?
How does our performance currently compare with TUX? We currently lose to TUX. TUX is currently, according to SpecWeb 99, 3 times as fast as IIS. However, that is correct. 3 times as fast as IIS-5. However, that is IIS-5 without SP6. So I do not know what the performance numbers for that is. We are only slightly less than 2 times, but again, we are pre-beta right now. So we plan to actually make more improvements. Yes? How much of this is going to show in IIS 5.1, if any? That's a very hard question that you ask. The truth is we actually don't know. Some parts of this may or may not go into it. Currently, all of this is slated for IIS 6 only. Currently. So there are other features actually beyond just the process model that we put in, beyond the configuration system. There are actually new security features that we put in. How many people are aware of the fact that iNetInfo run as local system? What that means is, of course, anybody can upload an ISAPI onto your machine or run an ISAPI that calls revert to self, thereby attaining system privileges and thereby giving itself God permissions on your machine. It can basically do anything. So we found that to be a security hole. So in IIS 6, we actually have something known as a configurable worker process account. So that means that you can actually configure a worker process to run under a specific account. IIS will actually by default run under the guest account. That way, even if you did revert to self, you become guest and you cannot destroy things on the system. So we actually prevent that type of a security attack. There is improved digest support. How many actually are familiar with the hotfix checker that's just RTW'd? If you're not, go to Microsoft.com. It actually RTW. It's not specific to IIS 6, but basically what this checker does is when downloaded onto your machine, and if you run it, we will actually go up to Microsoft.com and check for hot fixes that are not on your machine. If you don't have them installed, we notify you and say, hey guy, you have 3 hot fixes that you don't have on your machine. You can choose to download them or not, but basically it runs with Windows 2000 today. We added async CGI support. Basically, that frees up threads so that it doesn't block you when running. Something known as Execute Child ISAPI is a brand new concept. One of the problems that we had with customers is that customers wanted the ability to call another ISAPI from within an ISAPI. The most likely scenario in this case is authentication. When a request comes into a URL, they have an ISAPI there doing authentication. Once they've authenticated the user, then the question is, okay, you know, they were really asking for an ASP page. I really need ASP to run this page for me. I just needed to authenticate them. You don't have that ability today. But with IIS 6, with Execute Child, you can actually, yes, I know, bad name, but we had legal go over it. But it is called Execute Child ISAPI. If you think that was a bad name, you should have thought about abort. Abort transaction. Woo, people had a problem with that one. And then we added international support. As you probably know, ASP does not support Unicode that well, but we've actually improved that. And also, we actually put Unicode APIs into the ECB so that you can actually have an ISAPI support Unicode. IIS by default supports Unicode. It's just the ISAPIs that don't, so we had to actually make that gap. If you are familiar with or if you're interested in information about hosting IIS, hosting solution, there is something that we built called the Scalable Hosting Solution, or SHS. You can attend Web 203, which is at 1 p.m. today, to be held by Richard Ursek. He will talk about IIS running in the hosting space. So how are we doing so far? I just want to go over very briefly. These are the scalability numbers of the IIS 6 metabase. I used to do this talk, and it was so cool because we went from 250 websites per box to 5,000 websites in IIS 4. In our pre-beta version of the new config system, we are currently at 20,000 websites per box without noticeable performance degradation. And this is the performance number. So if you had 5,000 websites on a web server on one box in IIS 5, the startup time was close to about 170 seconds in order to start up IIS, because we need to read the metabase. And because of how the metabase was done, it wasn't exactly optimal. The new config system with the exact same number of websites is about 20 seconds. And in fact, I actually am lying to you when I say that. The reason being, about 2 days ago, the dev lead came to me and told me to change the slides, and I haven't had time to. But I'm happy to tell you that we're down to 5 seconds startup time for 5,000 websites. Performance improvements, as I said, UL is about twice as fast as IIS, and it's about a month ago. Today, we actually built something known as the ASP template cache to make ASP run even faster. In IIS 5, you're talking about 550, 560 pages per second. In IIS 6 version 2250, these are just our build numbers, we're a little bit over 600. And in IIS 6 2263, which I think was about 2 weeks ago, we're about 700 pages per second with the new template cache. Very quickly, bridging the gap between IIS 5 and IIS 6, one of the things that customers told us is there some type of guarantee that you can give us when we upgrade to IIS 6 that none of our current applications break? Mainly because, as you probably noticed, there are things about session state that people are not very happy with when we recycle them. There are things about multi-instance. There's things about out-of-proc, and people are just going, there's a lot here, and you're scaring me. So one of the things that we offer in IIS 6 is something known as compatibility mode. When you upgrade to IIS 6, by default, we will put you in compatibility mode. What does that mean? Compatibility mode means we guarantee you to be all your applications running. There are no known issues today. We have actually upgraded a few sites and had no problems doing it. I'm not saying that we won't have any problems. All I'm saying is that we're actually going to work really hard to make sure compatibility mode works, and that we will upgrade you very smoothly. In the compatibility mode, there is one worker process. We do not recycle that worker process. And your out-of-process applications continue to work as they are. The metabase still exists in inetinfo, just as it does today. Inetinfo still contains W3SVC, just as it does today. Everything works on top of UL. That is the only thing that's changed, but it is not noticeable, mainly because we use the exact same interfaces to talk to IIS. Yes? Do we have any performance numbers on compatibility mode? Right now, we are below the performance of IIS 5, but be aware that we are in pre-beta, and we guarantee you by beta 1 of us, which is coming up in October, we will be, our target is 90% of IIS 5 performance. By RTM, we should be at 100 to beyond. We will guarantee you that we'll be at least as fast, if not faster. So I've talked about compatibility mode. It is a huge global switch at W3SVC level. You can say, okay, I'm ready now to go over to the new mode. You flip the switch, and all of a sudden, we move everything out of proc. Your apps should hopefully continue to work. But again, if you have issues, such as session state, so you would need to be very careful how you configure your apps when you're ready to do so. There was a question there. Yes? Does IIS 6 run only on Whistler? The answer is yes. Is the global switch a one-way ticket? I had such a huge argument with my lead, and we like fought. Oh, no, it's good. I'm glad you brought it up, because we had a huge argument, and ultimately, no, it is not a one-way switch. In fact, you can go back and forth. If you moved over to the new mode and things are not working, flip it back, and then you're back into compatibility mode. So some of the things that I want to make you aware of is that we do not know of any issues with any of the DAV, ASP, or ISAPI extensions and filters, with the exception of one. If you have a customer that has something known as a raw data filter, as opposed to just a normal pre-proc notification filter, they will continue to run. We fought really hard on this one, and I being one of the people that actually forced us to make this support for it, because we couldn't support it and actually design the way to support it. However, they won't run as optimally as they did in IIS 5. So if they have a raw data filter and they move to IIS 6 in mode, they will actually lose in performance. We actually now recommend that you rewrite your raw data filter as something different, because we actually don't believe there's a need for you to use a raw data filter, with the exception of WebTV. We're still working with them to figure that one out. Again, some of the challenges that you need to be aware of is multi-instance issues, out-of-proc support, and of course, session state. Yes?
Well, what about, it seems like a lot of people want to actually do like server mode HTTP, do like say second stage server, like XML.
Excellent question. Is there going to be any server-side APIs to actually access other servers? The current answer is no. There are actually the works that we're looking at. Depending on how much work we get done, that may or may not make it in. I don't. Right now it's looking like it's not going to. I would be very frank. There's a lot of work that we need to do in order to make sure everything works, and that just doesn't really make the bar for us. Yes?
Is the ASP version that will be tied to IIS 6 will be ASP Plus?
No. The version of ASP that is tied to IIS 6 is will continue to be ASP Classic. ASP Plus will ship as part of Visual Studio. For those of you who are leaving, this is the end. I just wanted to make sure you guys fill out an evaluation form, and that's it. I'm here. I can answer any questions. Thank you. You're welcome to come up and talk to me afterwards, and I'm going to get this thing to work. If it's going to kill me. All right, here we go. Hi.
I just don't really know much about this, but I just thought one thing when you were into the database.xml.